as an HSP, my first inkling is to help soothe them. And I can't do that in a physical way because I'm not a nurse. So then I have to think about, okay, how am I going to do that with sound? And so it's much more than just using theory now. It's how do I use space and how close I am to them. Do I stand far away? Do I stand closer? How intimate do I want to be? And the music itself will always be very intimate. One of the things that you learn with MHTP or with therapeutic music is that we're not playing for an audience. We're not going to expect someone to clap for us. It's not for us. It's for them. And it's always going to be for them. So it's not really like playing music that we particularly like or enjoy, but it's music that serves as medicine.
This is Music Maker with Tyler Kline, a podcast from Loose Leaf Transmissions. Hey there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. If you are new here, my name is Tyler. I'm a composer, broadcaster, and producer, and I love to make things, and I love talking with creative people about how they make their work and what drives them to create. There are over 50 episodes now in the archive of this podcast for you to explore, so after this one, I hope you'll dig into some of the other conversations, maybe subscribe to the podcast wherever you happen to listen, leave a review. The more folks we have listening, the more sustainable that this work is. And if you have been listening for a while, welcome back. It's so great to have you. A very quick but important note before we get into this episode. This conversation very briefly touches on topics of suicide and sexual assault, both of which are mentioned in passing, but just want to be able to give you a content warning. And otherwise, this episode is all about music and creation and just a creative life. On today's episode, I'm joined by Lillian Yee, a composer, vocalist, and multi-instrumentalist based in the San Francisco Bay Area, co-founder of the Women Composers Collective, and a composer whose music has been performed internationally by ensembles including Axiom Brass, Calliope Brass, and Seraph Brass. But what really drew me to Lillian and what I suspected would make this conversation a little bit different than the others is that she's also training as a certified music practitioner, someone who brings live, improvised, and composed music directly to patients in clinical settings, often at the end of their life. And that practice turns out to be the place where everything else about her converges. The Buddhist chanting she grew up with, the empathy she's always written from, the years in indie bands, rediscovering the joy that music school had drained out of her, and the crisis in 2019 that made her ask what she actually wanted to do with the skills that she had. We talk about all of it. Sound as a physiological force, the inner child and the adult container, what it means to be a highly sensitive person navigating an industry that doesn't always have room for that, and why she believes making art is the ultimate form of love. This is a really excellent conversation, and it gets started in just a moment. Before we jump into things, a quick note. If you want to stay connected to what I'm building here, like new episodes, behind-the-scenes thoughts, and updates on projects like Living Classical, my new independently produced radio show, well, the best way to do that is through the newsletter. You can sign up on our website, that's looseleaftransmissions.com, or visit the link in the show notes. Now, on to my conversation with Lillian Yee. Well, Lillian, it is really great to finally meet you and to sit down and get to know you better today. And actually, I've really been wanting to have this conversation for a while because the scope of what you're doing as a composer and a performer, and notably a therapeutic musician, is I find to be really meaningful and fascinating. So all that's to say, I'm very excited to get into all of this. And so thank you so much for being here with me today.
Hi, Tyler. Thanks for having me.
So where we like to start here on Music Maker is as far back as you're willing to share and as far back as you remember. And that is, what is your earliest artistic memory as a composer, sound maker, musician, any of that?
As a sound maker, as a musician, it's with my grandma. It has a lot to do with how I grew up in a Buddhist setting, and she used to pick me up from preschool and walk me back home in a stroller, and she would be chanting the whole way. And we would chant every afternoon together, and she would chant me to sleep. And so my initial introduction to music has been through Buddhist chants. And in terms of composition, it was via a world literature project in high school. And it was about this one scene in a book called Night, written by Elie Wiesel. And that's about the Holocaust. And so I wrote to this scene where it was like he was looking at the night sky, and a bunch of people had just died. This is like, there's no good way in like talking about this.
Yeah. Understand.
But it was a horrific scene, but there was just like ghostly beauty about it. Like there's just, I don't know, it was haunting, and I wanted to write about that, so I decided to compose something for the very first time, and I recorded it onto my cassette player's Walkman, so it was portable, and showed it to the class, and that was my initiation to writing and to music, I suppose.
Was this a recording where you just like made something up at the piano and went straight into it, or did you actually sit down and like work out material, write it down, all that kind of like the composer thing that we
Yeah,
think of?
the composer thing. I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but that's exactly what it was. I sat down, I played on the piano, I was thinking about death, I was thinking about the Holocaust and feeling the oppressiveness of it, and I started to channel the oppression into the sound, and then was like, oh, okay, let's write this down, and fits of that, just like, yeah, working through the material and then putting it onto paper. It was weird because, like, you know, like in the beginning when you first start to notate stuff, it's weird because you don't know if you're doing it right. Like you're not sure if the theory is right. You're not sure if even like, just, I don't know. So it was hard, but and it took a really long time, but I was obsessed.
Did any other people in the class also do music?
No.
I love that. It's funny that you mentioned like this connection to literature because I remember my when I was in high school, my junior and senior year English teacher, he was the same guy, Mr. Mantooth, and I later found out that he was a French horn player. And so, you know, when we're learning about like transcendentalism and like all this kind of
Ooh.
stuff in the early 20th century, you know, I remember him playing like Schoenberg's Transfigured Night for us, like for the class, and of course, no one cared about it. But for me, it was like this like very visceral experience. Like, oh my god, like I'm 16, I've never heard music like this before. You know, I was playing in high school band, and I mentioned before this, and people listening to the podcast know I played euphonium, so there's no reason for me to have ever encountered a Schoenberg string sextet. And then it's just like high school English class, I encounter this. So I do think there's something about like the connection between literature and music that lends itself to that, of course. But it's really fascinating that your teacher would even assign like, I mean, I wonder if your teacher was expecting like, oh, someone might write a song, you know, like words and music and stuff like that, and then you actually composed a real piece.
Yeah, I don't know what the heck he was thinking, but but it was really interesting to watch because, like when you're in high school, a bunch of the students don't really care about the assignment, right? and he was this young teacher. I don't think he really knew what he was doing. But when the tire hit the road, like, I think some of the people really got into it. A lot of the projects were very half-assed. I might
Yeah.
say that on
Yeah. Yeah.
like, yeah. So, but it was interesting when other students were really, really into it. Yeah, it was fun. It really showed me actually just how seriously I took myself. And it was valuable. It was a valuable experience.
How did your life as I guess the beginning of your life as a composer unfold from there? Because this is a very different context than most people I talk to. I mean, I love it, but most people are like, oh, I was in a band, we played guitars and, like a band, and other people were like, I was in high school orchestra. And I mean, what was your musical output like after this point?
Oh my God. Okay, so in high school, I fell in love with Shinaringo. Shinaringo is like, I don't know how to explain. She's just this fiery, just beautiful artist that defined a whole genre in the 90s and 2000s of Japan. And at my school, we had this thing called Diversity Day. And like, I'm not Japanese, but I was also, well, I'm Chinese Vietnamese, and I participated in Chinese dance and everything. But I think like for the first year, I didn't see anybody represent Japan.
Mm.
And I was like, you know what? I love Japanese culture. And in hindsight, I guess I was a Japanophile. I didn't know it. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to represent Japan, the audacity. And so I decided to do Shinaringo covers at these Diversity Day events. And so I did it every year. And eventually the arrangements got more and more theatrical and more complex. The first year that I did it was my sophomore year, and it was like, I don't know, I found like a karaoke track to one of her songs called Yami ni Furu Ame. But then the second year, I did a whole like I wrote down an arrangement of my own arrangement with like strings and a choir, to a song called Soretsu, which is like, it means funeral procession. And like, it was really fun because we were all wearing black and we had masks and the whole choir like died on stage, and it was like really fun. And so, it sort of manifested in arranging for things. Yeah, and there was like even like dance choreography, and I made costumes for people.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's how it took off. And then when I like my senior year of high school, I was thinking about what to major in, and I had three options that I wanted to do, which was astronomy, composition, or animation. And I decided like I had sort of this aha moment of like, okay, I think the real question is, what would I want to do every single day of my life without being tired of it? And I think it was music, because I always have music in my head, as like a soundtrack every day. And I could never get tired of writing. I could always write something. So I figured that would be the thing. And then, school and here.
Did you have a framework for this in your life? I mean, or were you just kind of figuring it out as you went, like with these arrangements? And I'm also curious, like, I also did quite a bit of arranging like through high school. And do I do any today? I
Cool.
mostly arrange my own music for other instruments, which
That's cool.
is, it's like I was so resistant to that forever. And now I'm like exercising that arranging muscle again in my life, which is kind of fun. But I guess like, I'm curious if you had a framework for like, were there other composers in your life or other people doing like this kind of living music?
Not really. My parents were very against me being a music major. they were like, why would you? And so no, not at all. I just, thought, okay, well, this is a possible major and we'll see what happens when I get there.
How did the split between arranging and composing evolve over time at that point?
Oh man. So, well, when you get to college for composition, you learn very quickly that your composition professors do not have any respect for arranging.
Yeah.
And so when I brought my arrangements to my lessons, and they're like, what are you doing? I don't want to look at this. And so that's when I was like, oh, okay, well, this is not the place for that. So what I did instead was I co-founded a club at school called Multimedia Music Box, long for MMB. And what we did was we arranged music, soundtrack music from anime, video games, and movies. And it was basically a celebration for other composers' work that really inspired us. Because, like, as millennials,
Mm.
we've consumed all this anime and video
Oh,
games,
yeah.
this film, and become fans of these things that like have really moved us and changed our lives. And so we thought, hey, let's create a space where this could be alive. And so that's when it separated for me. And I think arranging is really good for your brain. It really helps you as a composer, I think, to learn other techniques from other people. So, yeah, that's when it split.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's this idea of like arranging as some sort of lesser art form compared to composing. I mean, it's almost apples and oranges. You almost can't even compare it, but it's like that's a ridiculous notion, right? Like there's an art form to arranging. And researching for this interview, I mean, you have so many of your own arrangements like listed on your website, which I thought was awesome, and it said a lot about you too, and in a positive way, of course. And so, yeah, was this also the first time that you encountered another composer in real life?
Yeah, at school. Yeah, it's very weird because I didn't know what to expect. And then I eventually learned that it's not just about the art. There's all this and like institutional stuff that um, I wasn't aware of, and hierarchy and history and lineages that, yeah, so it was interesting.
Yeah, all the stuff that I need to be careful not to go on a tangent about.
Oh, me too, actually.
So going to school, that was your first encounter with a composer. They were kind of like, no, you need to keep composition and arranging separate. Those are separate things. You form this club, the Multimedia Music Box. Um, how do you balance that through? Because I totally understand like the kind of almost like the dogma that you're talking about with
Mhm.
like someone in an academic setting, especially, or an institutional setting, even just kind of looking down at something that just doesn't really deserve to be looked down upon, like arranging. And I think all of us kind of encounter that in some way. And for some of us, we become that person. And for others, it's like, I know that I've had to really work hard against the dogma that I've encountered in those settings. So I'm curious, like, I mean, especially when you're younger, it's a lot harder to do. I mean, how did you, was it kept separate that whole time with the club and your studies?
Yes, well, it had to be. There was no way for us to. We were just not allowed, you know. But for me, especially now, like it's all together. Has to be, or else I split myself apart. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So, can you share a bit of an overview or connect the dots, so to speak, of your creative journey from that point? Because I mean, you do so much, and I admire all of it, by the way. Do you feel like you have followed a more conventional path, whatever that might mean to you as a composer, or do you feel like it was filled with unexpected twists?
So, how do I even start? So, the way that I write is very much like writing in a journal. And it's also mixed with my sensitivity towards empathy. And that's sort of been, I don't think I've ever talked about this before. That's always sort of been the baseline of how I write music and how I connect with music. And I think from a young age, I felt very connected to the people that I write for or sing for, because that's just always been how music works for me. I'm also like a really sensitive person, and I have sensory processing sensitivity, and I'm also neurodivergent. And growing up the way that I did, I had to also scan my environment really in great detail, and also have CPTSD. So that all sort of distills to this sort of obsessive need to scan the environment. And so growing up that way, that sort of led to also how I am as a musician. And as an adult now, I've learned to maybe take away the danger of that feeling, but to keep the skill of it. So when I write music, it's very much how I perceive other people and how they're feeling, and then being able to, well, actually, this is actually going into the whole like therapeutic music thing as well. It's all connected. So in college, when I wrote music, it would be because of any type of like challenge or hardship that I felt like I was going through. I wrote a lot about my relationships. I wrote a lot about my relationship with my family, with my my romantic partners at the time. And I made a lot of friends along the way. Eventually, I made friends at the conservatory. And so Cal State East Bay, which is in Hayward, and Conservatory, which is in San Francisco, and started mixing around over there. And there was this thing called a Guerrilla Composers Guild. And I think you interviewed one of the composers from there. His name is Nick Benavides, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I love him.
Yeah. Very nice guy and great composer. But yeah, I met him via the Guerrilla Composers Guild, and we became friends. And I participated in one of their, I think it was like some type of like competition, or I don't know if they called it that then, but it was like submit your score for the International Low Brass Trio. And my piece got picked. And there were, what, I think like at least 6 of us. They happened to choose my piece to name their album, which was amazing. And that piece was about a relationship, you know, no surprise. And it was called The First Six. And it's like the first 6 of 6 months of a relationship. And that's what I think got me on the map. I didn't know that it was Googleable. But
Yeah.
I was found. Axiom Brass found me on Google because of the International Low Brass Trio. And so, you know, little stuff like that. And then I composed for groups that were visiting the school, my school. And eventually, little by little, you know, you start to get to know these musicians and the circles that they hang out in. And my composition teachers, they were part of this thing called Composers Inc. And Composers Inc. had concerts often in the city, and I would go and try to shake hands with people there and try to get to know what the scene was like. And, you know, all during this time, I was feeling quite gypped at school because all of my white guy friends were like getting opportunities to do things, and like I wasn't getting the same opportunity and was like feeling sort of pissed about it. So I had a chip on my shoulder for many years in school. And so, it sort of encouraged me to do my own thing and to curate more concerts at school. I started doing ad hoc recitals, composition recitals, where the teachers weren't deciding whose pieces were being played. I was. So for me, it was fun because I was like, yay, mine and my friends' pieces are going to be performed. And so it all started with that whole rebellious, I'm an Aquarius. So it's like, it's going to happen. I feel cornered like that. And, to the respect of my teachers, I think they thought that I was too busy with everything else. And so maybe that's why, but I decided to take matters in my own hands anyway. And then, all during that time with Multimedia Music Box and composing, I was also sort of like the student mommy of the department. And I would curate a whole bunch of like events for people to hang out at. Like we had like a yearly beach day, and it was just really fun. So I was really, really involved. And then eventually towards the end of my time at Cal State, I was invited to join an Asian American indie rock band. And I had been invited because I started doing all this like jazz stuff at the school. And one of the bassists in the combos asked me, hey, we're doing this thing. Would you be interested? And I said, absolutely. So I was in an indie band for like 3 years, and that changed my life. We went on tour. It was a lot of fun. And we're no longer together, but, like it really changed the trajectory of my career because, well, obviously it's in a different genre, but like I felt like during school, the institution had failed me in a way and sort of zapped my passion for music for a bit. Like I felt really like I couldn't breathe, and that it just, I don't know, like my professors were kind to me. At the same time, I don't think that I felt really valued for what I could bring to the table. So I decided to go in a completely different direction and explore the side of me that I never really celebrated, which is like pop and rock. So that led me to being part of more bands and celebrating the rock music and the pop music that I've loved growing up. And in that, I met someone whom I got married to, who was part of the rock scene, but also the Brazilian scene, and like looped me into that. And I've been in love with Brazilian music ever since middle school. So like it's sort of been full circle of just celebrating all of the things that I love. And I find that like the older I get, I need to continue to celebrate everything. That's how I've ended up here, I guess. Long story short.
It's interesting to me, having, I think, similar interests as you, and having had to fight this again. I've gone down anti-institutional tangents on this podcast before, and I'll try my best not to, because I never know who's listening.
I know.
But I'm not afraid of those feelings that I have.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting that like this, like your North Star as a total musician is like this pursuit of what brings you joy in the work. And I think to your point, and to kind of behind the veil of my anti-institutional thinking, it's kind of that. It's like, I remember the feeling that I always had was like going to music school killed the magic of music for me. It's like when you open up a computer. I've never really opened up a computer, but I imagine it's like opening up a computer and like seeing all the guts and the parts and the wires, and it's like, oh, that's what it looks like inside. And it's kind of like, okay, now I understand how it works, but at what cost? And so I feel like, especially in the past, 3, 4, 5 years for myself, it's kind of getting back to that sense of magic and sense of play from before I went to music school, where it's like I don't have any regrets. Obviously, I'm very thankful for my education, and it's unlocked, endless possibilities for me. But I sit here every day and I'm thinking, like, I don't play music anymore. I don't play music in the sense that I don't perform, but I also don't act with a sense of play when I make music. And I think that's important. And I know the zeitgeist is kind of like feeding that to me through social media too, but I think I ought to be fed that. So, kind of to your point.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, I mean, I don't mean to like shit on my professors, Like, I love them. They taught me a lot about how to keep things interesting, how to think about form, how to be mindful of an audience, what to do with my compositional voice. I mean, they did their job. And I'm very grateful for them, and I love them still and keep in touch with them when I can. But yeah, it's hard when you're like, "Oh, I love music. I'm going to major in music." And then you go to school, it's like, "Oh, what is this?" Like, I don't feel like it doesn't feel like I can be creative anymore. It feels like I have to learn the rules and apply them in such a rigid way, and it just doesn't feel quite right. And so that's why, like, I'm a big believer of, okay, learn what you have to learn and then forget about it.
I always took like music theory classes with a grain of salt, because
Mm.
I always thought about it, like, I think I've said this on the podcast before. I've always thought about theory as like grammar.
Mm.
And it's like the same way that like a poet breaks the rules of, speech and grammar. We as composers also break the rules of music theory. And I went to school in undergrad with, we didn't have a composition program, but people composed, and like night and day difference between like me kind of ignoring music theory, and then like my friends who, like, music theory was the only way they knew how to compose, and it was like the most boring music. No offense to people who use theory when they compose, but
Caveat.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard because like that'll happen too, like when you get around jazz cats, like some of them are like, "Oh yeah, I use this chord there and that chord there. What are you doing there?" And I'm just like, "I don't know." I don't want to think about it that way. And then all of a sudden the conversation dies. It's like, well, the way that I approach music is, yes, very much very touchy-feely, and uh, I need it to be that way because that's what music is about for me. And so I didn't do very well in those compositional juries. You know, you sit in a room with what, 3, 4 teachers, and they're like, "Why did you do this?" And the only thing that you want to say is, "Cause I wanted to."
Right.
And why does anyone do anything? It's like, well, what's the theory? What's the theory behind why you did this and blah blah blah. It's like, okay, well, I have to explain myself in the most driest possible way. But anyway, I want to get away from that.
I'm curious about what you said about joining an indie band and that kind of changing your life. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I mean, did you play that kind of music growing up at all? I know a lot of composers who start in that setting and then they go to school and now they just compose, but it almost seems like you had the opposite journey.
Yeah, I went to school first, and so being part of a band was interesting. I mean, like the first band that I ever joined was a jam band. And so and those guys they didn't go to school for music. It was all like they really liked the Strokes, and like it was all sort of like burner people, and so it was just. And then like after that was the indie pop rock band, and those guys also were all like very jangle pop, very Brit pop,
Mm.
really like the indie scene in Japan and stuff like that. And like there isn't a lot of theory. So for them, it was more about having fun. and joking around and having a good time. And I appreciated that because in school, everyone was so serious. And it brought the fun back into what music was supposed to be in my mind. And bringing that into actual like chamber ensemble settings these days is really nice for me. Because it like you could tell like it disarms people when you bring that, electric fun, like sort of pop band or just band energy back into it. So yeah. Yeah, it changed my life in that way, and it made things more holistic, I think.
Just out of my own curiosity, I keep asking about balance because you do so many different things. I mean, what would you say, like, if it were like a pie graph? What's the balance of these different music making modes that you have? And I'm sure it changes all the time anyway.
Well, right now, I'm focusing on survival mostly. So, and the things that are bringing in an income is like lounge singing and teaching. So right now, the majority of my gigs are singing Brazilian music like bossa nova or samba. And, I also have gigs where like I'm singing a bunch of like American songbook stuff. So there's that. And also I teach beginner piano. And I get commissions for writing classical music. So those three things mostly. So the balance, yeah, that's the balance, I suppose. I'm not doing pop or rock anymore, even though I really miss it. And that's why my next album that I'll be releasing hopefully this year is going to be that, like indie pop rock. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. When did you know that you wanted to pursue your craft as a career?
Oh, that was when when I decided on the major. There was the three different majors. Like it was like, yeah, I can do this every day. Okay, how am I going to make that happen? So that was then. I was 18, I think.
Yeah, and you just haven't looked back since.
No, because it just made so much sense to me. It's like if I'm going to be if I know I can do this every day, why not do everything that's possible to make that happen? Or else I'm just going to hate my life. Yeah.
Tyler here, breaking in just briefly to tell you about something I think you're really going to love, and that's Living Classical, my new independently produced radio show. And if you're listening to Music Maker for the ideas and philosophies behind how composers think, well, Living Classical is where you hear how that music actually comes to life. New episodes release weekly on Sundays at livingclassicalradio.com or on our Mixcloud page. So we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but I first came across your work when I aired your piece Miracles of the Human Condition on my radio show, and that's what connected us, like, on social media. But it wasn't until I started following you on Instagram, and I should add that not only are you candid about like your creative life in this way that I really love, but that's also where I learned that you've been training as a certified music practitioner. And, that's when I was like, okay, I got to talk to Lillian because I've never met a composer, like a trained composer who writes chamber music and does all these other things, by the way, but also like you're making music in a very different way than anyone else I've ever met or been connected to. So all to say, I'm very curious. Well, I should also give a disclaimer to people listening that like the next while will probably be focused on this for that reason, because I'm just so curious about it. So I'm wondering what led you toward therapeutic music work. I mean, was your composing pointing you in that direction, or did it come from somewhere else in your life? And how do those two practices inform each other now?
So in 2019, I was working for the San Francisco Symphony at their gift shop. And at the time I was living in Sunnyvale. When I got in, it would be like a 2.5 hour commute And with Bay Area traffic, that's the worst. And I was going through a really tough time because I had just gone to the doctor. The doctor told me something that sort of confirmed this belief that I had, that I was cursed somehow, which isn't true. But like at the time, it felt really big, and it triggered me because I'm also a sexual assault victim. And so I was spiraling at the moment, and I had called a friend, and the phone call didn't go very well. I was feeling suicidal on my way to work. And when I got there, I couldn't work. I was in tears. And I didn't know, but that happened to be the last day that I worked there. After that, I took a break from working. I'd been hustling for years, trying to make ends meet. And luckily, I was supported by my husband at the time, which we are no longer together, but he was very generous and gracious with me. And he helped me through that time while I was trying to figure myself out. And I felt like this was a time of reset. Like I said to myself, well, I don't want to kill myself. I love life way too much. So what am I going to do with the abilities and the skills that I have? And I started to look back on the moments in my life that felt magical. And also, I'm still in therapy. And I was suggested to look into the spiritual practice. And how to describe it? It's an astrological thing. And so it has to do, it's called the 13 moon dream spell calendar. It's based off of like Mayan traditions, but it's not exactly based off of the original Mayan calendar. Well, it's not the original Mayan calendar, but is based off of it. So in this calendar, if you go back a certain date, you'll find what your purpose is in life, or what you were meant to do, or the themes and whatnot. And I looked at that, and it basically said, which I resonate with, that I, in this lifetime, am drawn towards knowledge, healing, and accomplishing those things. And so I started to brainstorm about like, okay, like knowledge, healing, what am I supposed to do? Art, what am I supposed to do? And okay, like how do people heal people with art, with music? For me, it's music. So after sort of swimming in this sort of magical thinking, sort of magical realm, I had remembered that everything that I had done up to that point, like I started learning the harp. And that was because, like I had written something for harp and talked to a harp teacher at school. And she said, well, why don't you learn the harp and do your own part? And so the harp fell into my lap then. And I really enjoyed playing for people. I really enjoyed, whenever I did play for people, they would give me this feedback of like, oh, wow, that felt so big, and something in me moved, and I didn't know that I could feel that way. And that sort of triggered something in me like, okay, if I have the ability to do this, what else can I do? And at that point, I remembered that when I was little, whenever I sang to somebody, they felt really good about it. Like they would say, oh, can you sing us another one? And oh, that felt so good. And then I started getting friends who had their hearts broken, and they would call me and say, like, Lillian, can you sing for me? I'm not feeling good. And so then I would sing, and that would help them somehow. And when I was 13, I'm getting into details, I guess. When I was 13, I started reading this series by an author called Garth Nix, Australian, I think, author. And in this story, it was part of the series called the Old Kingdom series. In the series, there's this heroine who is a necromancer, and her job is to put the dead back where they belong. And the way that she does that is via bells. So it's, these musical instruments. And so I sort of grew up with this relationship between spirituality and music. And also because I should mention too, like, I grew up Buddhist. My grandma and I would chant every day, and we would pray together, and she would chant me to sleep, and I was always around chanting. And so then with the story from Garth Nix, and then eventually, like, in middle school as well, I fell in love with Final Fantasy. I don't know if you game.
I do.
Yeah. Have you ever played Final Fantasy X?
10? Is that the PS2 one?
Yeah.
Yeah, full disclosure, I got to the end of the second disc and I couldn't beat the main bad guy, or the first disc. I got halfway through the game and I couldn't beat it, and I gave up.
10 was one disc.
Oh, 12 maybe? I don't know. Anyway. I digress.
So Final Fantasy X is basically about a summoner who there's this big bad villain called Sin, and there are summoners who eventually, like, they have to pray at every temple, and then they get their aeons, which is basically their familiars, their godlike familiars, to help beat Sin. And our main character, Titus, falls in love with the summoner, and her main abilities are healing. And even into Final Fantasy X too, like, she heals people through music. And so I just felt like a really big connection to her. And even later on, whenever I played, like, Smash Brothers or anything like that, like, my character name would be Yuna. And so, long story short, I felt this big pull to look into what that was, and eventually found a program called MHTP, Music for Healing and Transition Program.
Love it.
Yeah. I learned about this program it was during the pandemic, I believe. So it was like it was between 2019 and 2020, and enrolled, and now I'm in the program. I'm doing my practicum at Stanford University, and hope to finish within the next few months.
So first of all, I appreciate you being vulnerable about some of the details that you just shared. I love everything that you're saying, and I keep coming back to this word magic, because while I am not a healer, I, about a year ago, I had decided to leave my longtime day job, and the first thing I did when I was kind of circling that decision is I just tried to find it in my notebook, and I couldn't find it, unfortunately, but I think it's somewhere there. I made a list, and at the top of the list, it said, how can I make magic in the world? Not what kind of work I can do, not, what kind of services I can offer people. It's like, how can I make magic in this world and bring magic into other people's lives with the skill sets that I have? And, that's led me to double downing on, like, a lot of the stuff that I do when it comes to curation or communication, or, that's how because it's not just, I no offense again to anyone who lives this way. There's a lot of folks who do, who I love. But I don't think being just a composer is an attractive thing to me. It's like, how can I combine being a composer with these other things that I have skills in, that I can, like, really elevate people's experiences or existence even, and not to be, like, super dramatic about it, but, and hearing you describe what you have hearing you describe your journey. I'm giving a composer talk at a university next month. By the time people hear this, it would have come and gone already. And I've been circling around this idea of talking about why composers make great curators, because that's what I do. But hearing what you're saying, it's like, well, maybe the question in the presentation might need to be something like, how can we as composers pair our skills with other skills to like help people experience more of life in some way? That's a fresh embryo of a thought, though. So
all for it. That's what we're here. Yeah, that's what we're here for. Yeah. I think that's beautiful. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think composing, just like writing, right? Like it's a vessel. And what we do with that vessel, whether it be playing music to patients or uplifting other composers and putting, a lot of energy into bringing together a community, I think that's something really worthwhile. And yeah, I totally agree.
So you've said that you compose first for self-healing, and if listeners find meaning in that, that becomes collective healing. So curious if you can talk a little bit about what that process looks like. I mean, writing for yourself first, but also with the intent of holding space for others to find their own meaning in it.
This is very much a live by example type of thing. When I witness other musicians process their emotions, process their big emotions, and work through them, I feel like as the listener, there is a framework where I can do the same with a plethora of different issues that perhaps that musician didn't know that they were highlighting for other people. But oftentimes, like that's how I've experienced music. Like a lot of, for example, like Sheena Ringo's work, she's a very angsty, very, very angsty, very like, how to say, outspoken musician, especially in a time when Japan was highlighting idols, very like innocent, very picture perfect type of musician. And she just threw a wrench into that whole thing. And she was basically like the Fiona Apple to me of Japan at the time. And the same thing with Fiona Apple too, actually. Like I love Fiona Apple. And whenever I hear a Fiona Apple song and the lyrics and the energy that she puts into it, I feel like a part of me is healed. And I think that's a common experience of a lot of people who love music. So for me, it's just second nature. If I'm going to work through my stuff through my art, then somebody else will probably also work through something by listening to it and connecting with me over it.
I'm really interested in this idea because I, in the past, have also used composing as a way to process feelings, big feelings and small feelings. And I remember, I don't remember all the details because I think I blocked it out. But not long after I started grad school, I titled my piece something that alluded to some feelings I was having about whatever, probably a girl. And my teacher, like, he didn't make fun of me, but he was like, why are you calling the piece this? And I like couldn't explain it, like I couldn't put it into words, and he was like, don't call it that. And I was like, fine, I won't call it that, whatever. But I don't know, it's an interesting, because again, getting back to this like kind of institutional idea, and I think I'll just say I'll kind of like pull the curtain back every once in a while on my feelings about institutions and capitalism and the things that we're all being terrorized by. I think that capitalism, and I think the institution is a branch of capitalism, and it kind of like thrives on suppressing our joy and emotions. And so I don't know, I think for a lot of composers, we do have big feelings, and I almost feel like we encounter situations where we are denied being poets about it. And it's like, no, just write about this. Or, I mean, for a long time, my music ended up being about like, I'd read like a book that I love. And, the authors I love are so evocative, like Calvino and Murakami and all these guys. And it was very easy to make music about that. And then it's only been recently where I'm coming back around to like, no, I need to like excavate myself for my compositions, because that, and on one hand, it's like, will people care? I don't know, because, but then to your point, yes, they do, because we find what it means to us in other art, right?
I find that even outside of art, even in friendships or romantic partnerships, or people care about what you care about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. If you care about excavating yourself, you will start to attract people who are interested in the same thing.
For sure. So kind of getting back to this idea of like therapeutic music work, I mean, this is all connected. I mean, I imagine that the goal is to attune to patients' vital signs and kind of adjust the music in real time. Like, I mean, kind of like picturing myself in the room as a fly on the wall with you, with a patient. And that feels quite a bit the opposite of writing like a fixed score. So, I mean, can you talk a little bit about like how you do prepare for showing up and playing music for someone in those situations? And what does improvisation mean to you when it's, it's not about musical exploration, it's about like responding to someone else's body?
Right. Exactly. I use all of my compositional skills and the things that I've learned in school and apply it to that. And it is different because of the improvisational aspect of it, because you have to be a lot more like instant with the knowledge that you know. I'm very grateful to MHTP for teaching me how to sort of harness that skill, because what happens is when you go into a patient's room, you have to be clear. Like your energy has to, like anything that you've brought in from, like maybe, I don't know, you experienced roadkill on the way to work, or somebody said something unkind to you, and you're walking into a hospital or a place where the patient is, and you can't bring that in. So you have to learn how to let all that go, or just put it in a different place and be completely present with the patient. And that process is very vulnerable, because you have to entrain to them. You notice their body, how they're moving, if they're verbal, what their conditions are. Like, is this like a memory care type of thing? Like, am I playing to help trigger a memory for them? Or am I helping soothe their discomfort? Are they actively dying? Am I helping, like, ferrying them to the other side? Am I distracting them from their pain? It's a lot. And when you see the patient and experience their suffering, as an HSP, my first inkling is to help soothe them. And I can't do that in a physical way because I'm not a nurse. So then I have to think about, okay, how am I going to do that with sound? And so it's much more than just using theory now. It's how do I use space, and how close I am to them. Do I stand far away? Do I stand closer? How intimate do I want to be? And the music itself will always be very intimate. And it also has a lot to do with like matching their breathing and where they're at. One of the things that you learn with MHTP or with therapeutic music is that we're not playing for an audience. We're not going to expect someone to clap for us. It's not for us, it's for them, and it's always going to be for them. So it's not really like playing music that we particularly like or enjoy, but it's music that serves as medicine.
Have you, I'm just curious if you're willing to share. I mean, do you have, like a notable experience in playing music in this way or composing, making music in this way for a patient?
Yes. This is an emotional one for me. So there was a patient whom she was dying, and I didn't witness her passing, but it was she was on her last stretch, and she was nonverbal, and I just felt for her so much. So I went in and I noticed that she was Asian, and I played a little bit, and then I went to the nurse and I asked like where she's from, because they had mentioned that her family is too far to visit her. So I asked where she's from, and they said she's from the Philippines. And my ex-husband is Filipino. When we were together, his family told me their favorite songs, and I learned this one particular song called Dahil Sayo. And it's just this beautiful melody that the whole country knows. And so I felt like with that context, like perhaps it was painful that she wasn't able to be with her family, and that she's in this foreign land and she's passing. And so I played Dahil Sayo for her. And I did it in a very quiet way. And as I was playing, she responded to the music. She couldn't speak, but her eyes started darting back and forth. A lot of sighs were happening. I could tell that her body was working through something. And at some point, I felt a release in her, an emotional release. And I felt very honored to witness that, and very grateful that I had gone through what I did with my husband and his family in order to bring that moment to her, my patient. And so that was a tearful afternoon for me.
It's incredible. Like, I keep thinking of the concept that we all talk about with composing as like the toolbox, right? Like I have my toolbox I sit down with when I write a piece of music, or, a jazz musician might have a toolbox they go into a gig with before they improvise. I mean, we're talking about like a similar kind of toolbox that's like totally different. I mean, um, when I sit down to write music, my toolbox is like techniques and sounds and all that. But like what you just described is like you're pulling from your own life. I mean, I guess that's kind of like the common thread here anyway. But it's just an incredible story.
Yeah. I feel incredibly grateful that my toolbox has been my big feeling. It's not usually celebrated these days, I think. We're talking about capitalism and all that, right? Like the goal of capitalism is productivity. And feelings are not exactly the most important thing in that. It's
Right.
actually the frowned upon thing. Even in, going to school for music, I feel like emotions were sort of like not exactly the thing to focus on, even though we're in this because we're artists and we have feelings, so yeah.
I mean, I guess on this note, I mean, I was combing through your Instagram again because like you have so much to say about your art and your life that I appreciate. And I read a post where you were talking about, playing for people who know you, makes all the difference. And it's, it's not just about the music, but it's about the connection at that point. But in these therapeutic settings, I mean, you're playing for strangers in some of the most like vulnerable moments of their lives. So how do you think about connection in those two contexts? I mean, playing for people who you know versus playing for people that you're meeting at their bedside, and maybe only meeting like once.
Right. Well, I think it all stems from the purpose of the intention of the setting, right? Like when my friends come to my gigs, it's like I mentioned earlier, when you're doing therapeutic music, it's for the patient. When you're performing at a gig, people are clapping at you. It's like it's this whole I have this thing that I want to show you. I'm performing something for you, but it's really also more about like what I'm proud of to present. This artistic sort of thing, like this is my piece, Look at this piece. Whereas for therapeutic music, it's not about me at all.
Mm.
And so at a gig or at a performance, there's more ego there. And if I see familiar people, it's like, oh, we have this connection and you're witnessing me knowing that there's all this other context that you know about me. Like, this is an extension of my story, and you're witnessing that, and I feel very warm about that. Like, thank you for coming to witness that, you know? So that feels one way, but then with the therapeutic music, obviously, it's vulnerable and very intimate there too, but we are able to connect, and they don't have to know my context at all.
So I've also read, I've read your thoughts about how live music lets people actually feel vibrations from the instrument. I mean, this is another rabbit hole I want to be careful not to go down, because I'm realizing I've separated myself from live music for too long in my life to be good for me. I need more of it. um, and I mean, the key thing that you were talking about was like these signals that go through the vagus nerve, and that can calm the nervous system. So, how's understanding music as a very specific kind of like physiological intervention, I'll say, and not just as like an aesthetic experience, like you go sit in a concert and whatever. How's that understanding of the physical nature of it all changed the way that you think about composing concert works in those settings?
I think the first word that comes to mind is ritual. Um, so I mentioned earlier that my first introduction to music was via Buddhism, via my grandma. And in that practice, there's a lot of chanting, a lot of bells, and there's something quite clarifying when you hear a gong or a bell, something that sustains. It does something to your body, right? It calms you down, it puts you in a certain mood. And why is that? It's because of the vibrations. And so these days, after learning about what I did in my therapeutic music program, well, also, actually, there's this book where this French researcher took photos, like live photos of cells while playing one note, on like, I don't know, the double bass or a vibraphone or marimba or whatever, and would take pictures. And the cells changed colors and they changed shape. And so, even to that level of effect, like I think music, especially with, what was it? The vagus nerve is all through the spine, coming from like the base of your neck. It's connected to your ears too. So if your vagus nerve is affected by the sound, then the whole body relaxes.
Mm.
It's quite amazing. So For example, that's why I think the harp is such a powerful instrument for this, because it's a sustaining instrument. Of course, many instruments are great for therapeutic music, but the harp itself is amazing because you have a bunch of sustained strings at the same time. Now that's in a therapeutic music setting. Because you're close to the harp, it's going to affect you a certain way. Recently, the Women Composers Collective had a concert where one of my pieces was played, and that piece is called The Fragmentation of Man. There is a part that is played on bass drum. It's made for bass drum. However, I had to use a different instrument because I don't have access to a bass drum. I used a surdo instead, which is a big Brazilian drum. And there's a section that was meant to be a ritual, so calling in like a deity, and I wrote it in 13/4, and the rhythm was played on the surdo, and because the surdo is that sort of bass drum sound, when you play it, and with the specific rhythm that it was played in, it felt regulating. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, like, it was sort of like this ritualistic march. And so in 13/4, I think the rhythm was like boom, 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 like that. And it was like that for maybe 20-30 seconds of the piece. And, with string trio, and when you're playing that line, that bass drum line, those vibrations are going to hit the audience, especially in the space of the church that we played in, going to vibrate into the whole audience. And yes, the clothes on their body and everything in the church is going to suck up that sound, but it's still going to hit the body a certain way, and that's why it entrances you. And so my hope was to bring everybody into ritual together. And within that, I composed for the string trio to disrupt and fragment on top of that, and so sort of like the surdo part would always be like ironing out those fragments, because the fragmentation of man is about and I'm trying to heal that. So it was a very active, intentional desire to how to say, iron out the wrinkles of fragmentation in humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I got you. No, I love it. Did you explain this to the audience beforehand, or did they have access to program notes, or is your hope that like no explanation needed, they just experience this and you take them along for that ride unbeknownst to them?
I did not want to explain that process at all. I didn't want anyone to come up to me and say like, "You witch," So I was
Yeah.
just, "Oh, you're gonna be here. You're gonna experience it. If you like it, you like it." I mean, there was like context of like why it was in 13, but I don't want the audience to have to do homework.
Yeah, I love this idea of ritual. I was in Tokyo a little over a year
Recent.
ago. Yeah, and fortunately, I get to go back soon, ish. It's like 2 years apart, and that's too long.
Yay.
But so my friend who I went to college with here in the United States, her dad is a Buddhist priest, and she found out that I was going to be there, and she programmed one of my pieces, and I think people have seen me conduct it on the internet or whatever. And then
Mm-hmm.
afterwards, my wife Susanna was with me, and afterwards, uh, our friend Ronco was like, "We're doing a service to honor my grandfather's like death anniversary or something, like in the Buddhist temple in her parents' house." and it was like just like very close family and us invited, and so I'd never experienced anything like that before. And I mean, same situation, like I'm not, I mean, I knew I was getting into like a Buddhist service, but there was no explanation of what that was going to be like. And it was just like I was just along for the ride. And um I'm not sure if prior knowledge to like the sounds of it, or I'm not sure if that would have enhanced it or not. I think like I really love just like being in the moment and like not knowing what was happening and that kind of thing. And I don't think enough music does that. I mean, not that we all need to write like ritual Buddha music, but I think like too much music is like too in your face, and I think we need to slow it down. Sometimes, you know.
Yeah, definitely. So I love using music to connect back to the earth. I think as human beings, we are children of this earth. We are organic and of organic matter. And before industrialization, we were pagan. In so many countries, we originally had paganistic traditions. And I think it matters for us to reconnect with the true essence of where we come from. You know, we are one with all the animals, and it needs to connect to that. It's all cyclical, and you know, when we're too in the mind, which I have a tendency to get into, I might get stuck there sometimes. But when you reconnect with your body and with nature, something incredible happens. You know, it's like going to church and witnessing God.
Mm.
Right? It's much bigger than you when you're witnessing, you know, higher source, and just connecting to that. I think it's really important for anyone, I think, to be part of this bigger feeling, this sort of collective feeling. And I think that also brings you into a very personal, very individual place as well. So in general, I think it's a good practice to remember where we all come from, and via music, that that's I think that's the most applicable thing that we can talk about now, since we're talking about music. But like, using music to reconnect with the world, with humanity, is very important to me.
If you'd like to support this work directly, Patreon is the sole source of income for Loose Leaf Transmissions. It's what makes the time, equipment, and ability to say yes to more conversations and better programming possible. And if you're not ready for ongoing support, you can also leave a one-time tip on coffee. You'll find both options at looseleaftransmissions.com/support. And thanks so much for supporting this work. So usually by the time that I ask this next question, this is a question that I ask everybody. It's been answered in some form or fashion in some way, but I'll be a little bit more direct with it. And that is, what would you describe as the primary pillars of your creative practice? So that could be like pretty much what the foundation of your art making is, you know, style, philosophy, aesthetic, anything like that.
So I often hear music in my body, and even though it's a very it can be a very heady experience. Like, I'm constantly walking around with a soundtrack, and of course, like, I can turn it on and off now, but when I was younger, in my 20s, it was always on. And at this point, I think in my 30s, if it were always on, I think I'd go crazy. But as I've gotten older, I've appreciated the silence. So I think silence, very very similar to you, is a pillar for me. But let's see what else. I think empathy is also a really big pillar. So silence, soundtrack, empathy, and I think I just have this big love affair with music, with art, and with trying to understand other people, or trying to understand my relationship with others. It's always in connection to something. So how I interface with others is also probably a really big pillar as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think this idea about the soundtrack is a little interesting to me, and I'm only taking it in this direction because you seem interested in like kind of what I'll describe affectionately as like the woo woo, which I share that same interest, and we can go there if you wish, but um, this idea of like a soundtrack playing in your head being not just being like a thing you experience, but being like a primary aspect of your musical existence. In that regard, do you feel like you're somewhat of a conduit to something?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think we all are, in a way. But I'm biased because I'm a musician. That I think musicians especially are, or any artist really. Um, yeah, we're always channeling something, whether it being processing other people's emotions or our own.
Yeah, I've always loved this idea of like being a conduit to something, because it's one, it's like no one ever talks about that. Like we're not going to talk about that in like an academic setting, right? Because it's crazy, and when I it's not crazy, but they think it's crazy, right? um and when I'm like thinking about this, it's not like I'm waiting for the to be kissed by the muse, like that classical kind of thought. It's just like being receptive, and I'm the same kind of way where I don't know if I'm like, I've learned that this isn't like a common experience, but it's like kind of what you said earlier, like it's second nature to me. It's like I can just like summon music in my head. I
Mhm.
can hear it. I can hear a full orchestration of music in my head, a song or whatever. And I don't know, I think there is something to that is a little bit mystical, but even like this just this idea of like I've been getting so many new ideas and fresh ideas to me lately, and it's like I think it's because I've been working on unblocking myself, and it's like all these musical ideas are coming to me, all these ideas for like how I can express myself musically, and it's just like I'm not sitting around waiting for them. It's like something hits me over the head, and so I when you talk about like the soundtrack, that's kind of what I'm imagining. But please correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh no, that's definitely, yeah, that's definitely it. And like I find it interesting that you're talking about the whole like conduit thing, because like you know I really wish they did talk about this in music school, or and because we're not we we're not wizards and warlocks, like trying to create
Yeah,
music. It's we really are the vessel in which we can access the music. And the music itself is like the song of the universe, where we can maybe touch and grab a little bit of, and just sort of like, I think that's the mystical woo woo part of it, right?
yeah,
So and it seems like you also feel very similarly, where it's this river where we can just walk into, and then maybe hoist some of it up into our own little basket, and then maybe do something with it. So yeah, I appreciate that you and I share that.
yeah, yeah. No, I think I wouldn't be surprised if more people did feel that way, which is why, and we never talk about it. I mean, that's kind of why I want to do this podcast, and is so we there's a space for me and someone else to talk about the things that we know, right?
Right.
So
I mean, yeah, I do talk about this with my collaborators too, and often the question is, what does the music want us to say?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, I could see you. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. I love that.
yeah.
So you've said that you love being messy and chaotic in your creative process, and that the imperfect, messy work is a celebration of life, but also that it must be contained. And I know that I think one of your Instagram posts. I've read so many of them. I hope that's okay to say.
Oh, yeah.
But you described your work as both a sword and a shield, and also a little bit rebellious and a little bit tender. And so, like, that's a lot of contrasting elements, I'll say, and it's a lot of big kind of. It's not monolithic, but these are very big ideas that you. I mean, how do you hold all of that? I mean, the messy and the protective and the rebellious and the tender. How do you hold all of that in your music? And what does contained chaos actually look like when you're composing?
I suppose the way that I would explain it is the music is a place where, like, the pure creative aspect of it is where my inner child gets to run free. And as the adult, I get to hold that container for her. So I get to, as the adult, well, let's start with the inner child, right? The inner child is going to have a lot of just raw emotions like anger and rage and like lust or joy or playfulness. And as the adult, I get to sort of set the boundary of like, well, how would you like to express this? And let's make sure it doesn't go crazy. And I think in that way, it's nice to be messy and imperfect. And as long as I don't allow her to completely take over. Because if she does, then you're going to just listen to a big mess of music that doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. Is there an example of how you've had to employ that containment in a work of yours?
Yeah. Probably in every single piece. Because if I wanted to, which often I do, everything would be pre-composed without any type of reference to any theme that I've made, and it wouldn't be cohesive at all. So it's like probably in every single piece that like I have to implement that.
We're kind of talking about this as a like a compositional device or technique even, but I kind of feel the same way with like when I have ideas. Like I was just saying, I've been getting a lot of like,
Yeah.
and I'll tell Susanna, it'll be like 11 p.m. and like everyone's about to fall asleep, and I'm like, what if I did this? And it's like, just like hear me out. It's crazy, and like just crazy ideas. And even the other day, I said something to the effect of like, and I've started prefacing this for more for me. You know, this is like a reminder to me where I'll say something like, I just want to say this idea and I want to sit with it. I don't want to like take it in any direction. I don't want to kill it. You know, that most importantly, I don't want to kill it, but I also like, I'm just going to say it. And that example was, I think I need to develop a performance practice. And she was like, I've been thinking that too. Speaking of like the field of consciousness. And it's that like little bit of a prologue, a prelude, if you will, to an idea where it's like, I'm starting to recognize I need to, it's like I need to give myself permission to have the idea and to run with the idea with the assumption that I will clean it up later. But if I clean it up right away, I'm not going to do it. Right. Like no version of it will exist. And so,
because you're censoring.
Yes.
In
Exactly.
real time.
Yeah.
Like how unfun is that, right? Like when you have, like when you're a kid and like your adults, your parent or whoever is like taking you to the playground. It's like, okay, you can only play on the slide, but you can't go on to the monkey bars or whatever, right? Yeah, that's no fun.
So this idea of like the inner child versus like your adult self and like containing that, like it's very like, for me, I have to be very careful about that, but it's like, I totally get what you're saying. And it's even, I was talking with Sugar Vendel, who's a composer in New York City, composer, pianist, choreographer, does a lot of things, really amazing conversation. And something that she said was she had gotten so conditioned to applying for grants that she started to dream smaller. And so it's that, like, that's all like the same, it's connected to me. Like And so I've had to be very careful, not just in my music, but like in the ways I conceive how I want to move through the world, you know, as a musician, as a composer, as a whatever else I'm doing, you know. And I love the metaphor of like containing the inner child, because that is what we're doing. I mean, it can't run amok, right? Like I'll spend all kinds of money on stupid stuff that I don't need, and like whatever, like I'll end up with like a room full of modular synthesizers or something, and
Those are
can't have,
great.
right. So yeah, I love that.
Mm. I was connecting with what you were saying earlier too about like silence and space and body, and like I was just reminded that you recently posted about like a piece of yours, I think, and it was called Tattoo.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I was really interested in how you incorporated breath into all of that, and it felt like as a composer and also as a listener, I was like, how did he write that? And like how did he come about? And you know, and then I read, you know, like what you had written about it, and was just like so excited that you had explained all of that in a reel.
Yeah. I'm glad to know someone reads it.
Yeah,
Usually I'm just like, put it out there or whatever. But
yeah, it's definitely very interesting, and like I don't know, like even in the video itself, like you had the notation, and I liked how the notation looked, and it really did feel like if I were performing it, I could I could feel the music as opposed to it just being like, you know, ink or whatever. It really felt like a picture poem that
yeah.
I look at. I think that's really interesting. I myself have not like ventured into that realm of like making the music look like how it's supposed to be played as opposed to just dots and diagrams and such.
Yeah. Well, I'm very fortunate that I've worked with performers who have, in this case, Unmiko, pushed me in that direction. Um, and I'm not sure I would have arrived at that same point if she wasn't like, get rid of all tempo. You know, let me do whatever I want, basically. And I'm like, okay, I trust you. So at any rate, so I want to get back to something that you mentioned. I mean, you just very quickly mentioned it earlier,
Mm.
and but otherwise, you've been really open about being neurodivergent, high sensory sensitivity, and ADHD, and how that shapes both your therapeutic work and navigating musical spaces as well. And you wrote that the artistic journey can be very lonely,
Mm.
especially as a woman, and that finding supportive community requires bravery, persistence, and care. So, can you talk a little bit about what that navigation has been like for you, and how your sensitivity, both like emotional sensitivity, but also like sensory sensitivity is like a different animal as well, how that shows up as perhaps a strength or a challenge in the different roles that you play?
Yeah. Well, I think it's easiest to talk about the challenges, but you know, I definitely feel the strengths as well. So I'll start with challenges. I have trouble with social cues. I've had so many social casualties in the past. I don't know, ever since I went elementary school, but like when you start getting into the industry and you start, like I might have mentioned earlier, like you start to, when you go into school for music, you don't realize that it's just the art, it's also the lineage, it's also the institution, it's about hierarchy, it's about all this stuff. And for someone who doesn't register that right away, like you step on a lot of people's toes. And as an Asian American woman as well, like it's so awkward. It's just so awkward when people profile you and then they think that you're supposed to be this sort of like passive thing, a very submissive passive thing, and then all of a sudden you're very fiery and you don't read the social cues very
Yeah.
well, and it's like, what, you thought you were supposed to be conscientious and graceful and elegant and eloquent and you know, learn how to say things at the right time? Absolutely not. I've put my foot in my mouth almost every single day of my life, and like it's just been really hard because me being direct has often been very uncomfortable with people. And as somebody who has CPTSD as well, like, it's very scary when you say the wrong thing and then all of a sudden a relationship changes or an opportunity is lost. Because immediately you'll think, oh, it was my fault. It was all me. And
Yeah.
I don't belong in this space. I don't know how to act. I don't know how to say the right thing. And I'm just going to make someone uncomfortable. And I think now that I'm older and that I've put my foot in my mouth enough times, I'm starting to feel like, well, yes, there is a sense of decorum. Yes, there is like being conscientious and mindful and thoughtful, and at the root of all of that, like if I am in integrity with being kind, then really there isn't a way for me to put my foot in my mouth unless other people are particularly uncomfortable with being honest. So at the end of the day, how much am I a mirror to other people? How much are they projecting their own discomfort of with themselves onto me? And that can be really eye-opening, but also I sing at wine bars. I sing at bars and people are drinking. They, come up to me. Like I've been told, oh, you're so beautiful, you're my brown-eyed girl, that type of thing. And I'm like, I don't even know who you are. I don't even know
Yeah.
your name. I'm your brown-eyed girl, excuse me. And it's like, okay, what do I say? Like what like do I do the professional thing and say, excuse me, I have to go pack up my gear or go to the bathroom? Thank you for listening to music. Please tip your bartender, whatever. Or do I dunk the beer that he's drinking on his head and walk away and never get that job again? And so, and like being Asian American also is part of that, and being a woman is part of that, because it's like if I were a white guy being like, dude, why'd you say that? Or like, dude, that
Yeah.
was cool. Like
Right.
it wouldn't have been such a big deal, perhaps. And just being flustered in that situation is like, how does one even, it showed up. My neurodivergence and the trauma that I've experienced as a kid growing up has shown up in ways where like I don't know what to say, and my response is to fawn. It's to be nice and to sort of laugh it off, and then hours later just hate myself for it. And I'm lucky that I've had friends who've stood up for me, who've protected me if they were there, and when they weren't there, would empathize with me and would encourage me not to gaslight myself, because oftentimes it's like, was it me? Was it what I was wearing? What was it, like what I said? Should I have not been so nice? And so the whole like social aspect of it has been a big challenge for me, especially since like I sing at bars, and I'm a nighttime person. And so, in those types of spaces, you're going to but like there's going to be a lot more opportunity for people in the nighttime space to do the nighttime thing, you know. But even during like daytime stuff or like being a composer, that's also been awkward too, because most of the composers that I've met are neurodivergent in some way.
Right.
I mean, we're all obsessed with writing or obsessed with the thing that we're writing about. And so it can be exhilarating to talk about a similar interest. And at the same time, socially, things can get awkward really fast, because oftentimes, like, I think like these days it's different. It's starting to change where people ask for consent a lot easier, and people are more aware that consent is an actual thing. But with the older generation, like lines could be crossed and you have no idea what's going on, and then you think you're being nice, but you're also not serving the project, or it gets hairy. So yeah, it gets hard.
I've spoken with some composers about their neurodivergency as it pertains to like the process of their composing.
Hmm.
And I guess I'm curious about that as well. I mean, do you feel, and the one composer I'm thinking of, Annika Sokolovsky, who I had on the podcast, she described it as, she characterized it almost like a superpower, almost like her neurodivergency lets her like go deeper into the process at times, in addition to the challenges that come along with neurodivergency. So I'm curious if you have noticed anything about that, especially like with sensory sensitivity. I imagine that, I mean, composing can be like a very sensory experience, right? And so I'm wondering how that shows up for you.
Oh my God. I don't think I even have words to describe that, but yeah, like it's because of the SPS, or the me being an HSP, I feel things 10 times, as I've been told, 10 times as much as other, maybe more neurotypical people. And that lends itself to the therapeutic music as well. So my thing is the empathy aspect. Um, and I mean, like if we're talking about like physiological sensitivities, like I have light sensitivity, I have sound sensitivity, and I feel people's emotions through sound, so like it's very easy for me to imprint a sound to how people are feeling. And I think that might sound sort of weird, maybe, but I don't even know how to describe it.
It almost seems, and I could be getting this wrong, and please do correct me if I'm wrong. It almost seems like some sort of adjacency to synesthesia, where maybe a certain, instead of like a sensory, like, oh, when I hear this note, I see this color sort of situation. It's do, is it more like the sound of a particular music becomes associated with, like an emotional characteristic of a person in a way.
Yeah, perhaps. Like, how some people see auras, I guess?
Mm, yeah.
I think for me, it's very similar, but sonically.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's amazing because, like, I've seen this very present in, like, when I see other people doing Reiki. They'll just know where the energy is and how to unblock, or where to touch, or where to go. And I think for me, the more I listen to somebody talk, or even lack of talking, but like the more I explore the physical energy around them, something comes up. And I have to be really careful about not projecting my own thing onto them. But I don't know how to describe what that is.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really fascinating. I've never talked with anyone about this stuff on the podcast, at least. So it's very cool.
Kind of weird. Neither have I. I've never talked about this with anyone before. So, but I think it also has to do with like maybe their body language and how they process information, how they express information. I think because of the whole CPTSD thing, like I often observe how people move and what that means, and what that like if they're feeling nervous, like they might mess with their hair or adjust themselves in their seat a lot, or they might blink a lot, or and I will take those cues in versus if they're feeling ill and feeling slow, sad or depressed, contemplative, like you can tell by how fast the person is moving and in what way. So yeah, that's that's me.
Again, this is something that like I don't know how many people would be agreeing with what we're saying or feel the same way or anything like that.
He's weird.
But, I have to believe that, um, these kinds of things go through people's minds. And I do think we are uniquely positioned as composers to be sensitive or attuned to this way of thinking, because among the performing arts or the arts in general, I mean, you can have big emotions in a movie, but you're audio visual at that point, right? Or there's like ballet. I'm thinking of other art forms dependent on time moving by. Whereas music is just, it's sound. We don't have any other aids like a visual component. I mean, some people do a lot of times, but music in its purest sense is just sound, right? And so I think as composers, we are uniquely positioned to be able to do something with that sound in the kinds of ways that you're describing.
Yeah, I think so too. I think I'm starting to realize too, though, that probably my experience as a singer is coming into this as well, because oftentimes as a composer, I'm realizing that how the audience participates with my music in a live setting is very passive. But if I'm a singer, if I'm a performer, I'm singing to the people. I'm watching them interact with me. That is much more of an active, I think, position, and I've experienced a lot more of that. So, when you're sort of serenading someone, for example, they will react to you a lot more. Yeah, so that's been really interesting too.
Yeah. We're going to have a part 2 conversation one day. Well, one of the things I wanted to make sure that we talked about is that you're a co-founder of the Women Composers Collective, which focuses on representation and community building for women composers. And so what led you to help build that infrastructure, and how does organizing fit into your creative life alongside composing and performing?
So, remember earlier when we were talking about our gripes with the institution? The institution.
I'll never forget.
It was because of that. Um, I I got tired of waiting for other people to give me the permission to do something, and decided to give myself permission to do it. So I, for like a decade, talked about, "Ugh, there really should be like a women composers thing, and why isn't there anything?" And just was started to think about, like, well, how can I make one? And I started, talking. It all started in school, actually. So this was like what, 10, over 10 years ago. Just being unhappy about the opportunities that we were getting, like I noticed that a lot of my peers who were men had all of these opportunities to get challenged in their art and to grow. There isn't much growth without challenge. For the women in my few years, like at that school, they weren't really taken very seriously. Even the ones who really seriously wrote, like, I didn't see a lot of encouragement or opportunities to grow and to work out what their voice was until they went to grad school. And that really pissed me off. Lovingly, I say. Uh, but yeah, it really bothered me. And so over the years, I talked to more and more women composers. I aired out my complaints and eventually came to the point of, like, you know what, let's do something about this. Um, I'm going to start reaching out to other women who feel very similarly, who want a place to say something. And I had interned at Center for New Music in San Francisco just to get an idea of what the infrastructure would be for a collective and for just like avant-garde groups or whatever, and realized that there wasn't, like, everything is very DIY.
Mm.
And the good thing about DIY is I actually really like DIY. So if things are DIY, I can make it however I want it to be. So I started to change my narrative when I talked to other women about this type of thing, and was like, are you interested in being part of something that, you know, we could be proud of, something that we could have our works and other women's works, and then maybe eventually even go into schools and encourage female students to rise up and have a platform for them to express themselves. And they were on board, and since then we've been growing. Our last concert during the intermission, it was like one of probably the biggest thing that we've ever done, which is in collaboration with a local group called the Glenview Classical Series in Oakland. And they feature a lot of living composers, which is very encouraging. And they seemed happy to have us do a show, and they want us to come back, which is yay. But like during the intermission, I had a woman come up to me and say, you know what you should do is at some point during the concert, you should ask all of the women composers in the audience to stand up. And I said, that's a great idea. And so before one of the pieces, I did exactly that. And like over a third of the room stood. And it was a full hall. And like, so I stood there and I was almost crying. I had to keep it together so that the program kept going. But I stood there and was like, you know, this is like over 10 years of me wanting this to happen. And it finally like comes to this point where all these women are sort of just like, yeah, we're here. And it's just like, I want more of that, you know? That felt so good. And so now instead of like, yes, even though it was born out of me having a chip on my shoulder, now it's this just beautiful community building thing that hopefully will be bigger than me someday. Which I think it already has like grown to be bigger than me. So I'm just very happy that that's manifested the way that it has. But yes, that's how it all grew.
I too am fueled by spite and DIY energy, so I totally get it. So one of the questions that I ask everybody, another one of the questions that I ask everybody is about inspiration. And so that is, what is a piece of music, a song, a film, a book, a piece of art, you know, any kind of like artistic artifact? You can name more than one, certainly, that changed the way that you thought about your work, or even changed your life.
Oh my God. Okay, I get to nerd out now.
Please do.
Okay, well, I grew up loving anime so much and video games, and so Yoko Kanno is like the biggest influence on me. Do you know who Yoko Kanno is?
So I was going to clarify for those listening who might not know, and correct me if I'm wrong, she's best known as like Cowboy Bebop, right?
Yeah, she's the composer for Cowboy Bebop. She's also the composer for Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex, I believe for the 2 seasons, maybe even more. She did Wolf's Rain. I love Wolf's Rain. Wolf's Rain is so good. Yeah, she's a huge composer in Japan, and just iconic because she can do so many different things. Like Cowboy Bebop was all jazz, you know. But Ghost in the Shell is like this electronic fever dream, and it's just very existential. And then like Wolf's Rain has this sort of chamber pop but new agey feel to it. I don't even know how to describe it. She uses, it's like, it's just so cool. Okay, I'm not really describing it other than just nerding out about how much I love it. But Final Fantasy X was another one. So Final Fantasy X is a video game, and I'm a big Final Fantasy X fan. I've played it 2.5 times, and why I didn't finish it the third time was because of school. But like, it's a good game. It's a good game that talks about. It's very anti-institution.
Maybe I need to play it again then.
Yeah, I mean, it's like basic. I can get into it. How much time do we have allotted for like nerding out?
Now we are nearing the end,
Okay,
so
I won't. I won't.
yeah.
But yeah, Final Fantasy X, Sailor Moon, Wolf's Rain, Cowboy Bebop. There's an anime called Mushishi that I really, really love. But also like I haven't even mentioned like Ruichi Sakamoto and like how Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence just like changed my life. And I also perform a lot of Brazilian music, right? So like when I was 13, my mom had this mix CD of world music or world pop, and I believe it was like track 6 that was Manhã de Carnaval, which, do you know that song?
I
It's
don't.
Day in the Life of a Fool. It goes like, Manhã tão bonita manhã. And it's this very sort of noir feeling. Like it's great to listen to at like 2 a.m. in the morning. And it's just this beautiful song that is connected to the movie Black Orpheus. It's called Black Orpheus in some circles. It's like a standard.
Hmm.
But that very recording with João Gilberto like singing it is not a very popular recording, but it really changed my life and where it was the gateway to Brazilian music for me. And so a similar mood to that is like Tom Jobim's Saudade do Brasil, and it's this. There's no vocals on it. It's purely instrumental and very haunting. And so yeah, these are things that you might want to check out if you're interested in the things that I'm into.
Yeah. I have to be very careful as well here because, like yourself, you mentioned earlier, you're a Japanophile, so am I, but also Ruichi Sakamoto is like one of my North Stars, if you can have more than one. But I just spoke with composer Dai Fujikura, who is friends with Sakamoto, and so I've already said my piece on the podcast. So, um, but um, but at any rate, first I need to clarify because you were mentioning uh, the anime names and the composers or the composer in one case who wrote the music for these animes, but am I interpreting it correctly that also the animes themselves are inspirational to you or just the music?
Yeah, completely. Like the animes, definitely for sure. Very, very, how to say, important to my upbringing and being who I am today.
So, of these composers that you've mentioned, Yoko Kanno, Ruchi Sakamoto, I've seen on your website, you mentioned Joe Hisaishi,
Yes.
who, again, is, for those who might not recognize that name, is the Studio Ghibli movies, primarily. And, these are composers who focus on melody and narrative a lot of times rather than the avant-garde. Though I have heard like Hisaishi's avant-garde music, which is wild, and Sakamoto, of course, has his own experimentalism that he
Mhm.
does. But at any rate, what draws you to that lineage, and how do you see yourself maybe extending it in your own work?
Well, so I'm not Japanese, but like what I do admire about that, like how they approach music, is very much tied to nature. Nature and like how one experiences nature. There is a certain flow to Hisaishi's writing, Yoko Kanno's writing, Sakamoto's writing, like that feels very organic. In terms of culture, and it is different because I'm Chinese Vietnamese, but throughout the Asian diaspora, we do share similar scales and themes. Japanese scale is different, but there are aspects of it that feel very at home to me. Like with certain Chinese composers as well, like we'll use the pentatonic scale and all that. But what I enjoy about these Japanese composers is the mixture of East and West together. And that speaks to me as an Asian American person in appreciating Western classical music, but also mixing in that sort of element where it just feels like it's like home for me, which is, my Chinese Vietnamese side, and through association, Japan. And, Japanese music over the years has been and Korean as well, has been the most popular gateway into Asian, just like a cultural understanding. So I think it's just like sort of a convenient way to access that for me. And also because I love anime and video games and all that stuff. It's also actually because of Buddhism, because of how I grew up, that I want to include those practices and the general vibe and mood and philosophy into my music. So, in a roundabout way, Japan is included in all that.
Mm. I'll also say, I love, in particular, Ryuichi Sakamoto's music. I love all the music of the composers you've mentioned, and you
Mm-hmm.
also had some. When I was looking over your website and program notes for different pieces and coming up with the questions, I noticed like the band Treecoat came up, which I've
My God.
never seen anyone else. Like I love that band, and like you're the only other person I've ever seen like mention that anywhere on their stuff. So at any rate, though, what attracts me to Ryuichi Sakamoto's work is not just what you're describing, the aural qualities of it, but just like, and I think this is a very non-American perspective, not specifically a Japanese perspective, but he's the example I always think of where, he was a composer, he was a pop star, he was a performer, he was a producer, and he wrote like movie scores. I mean, he wrote the score to like The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio, right? And but then he's like doing all this extended technique piano stuff too, and it's like it's wild. And to me, I think in the United States anyway, my observation is if you're a composer, you got to pick what kind of composer you are, or else you're out of luck. And it just seems like everywhere else, especially Japan, it's like in the case of Sakamoto at least, like it's like a composer is all encompassing. It means that you can make whatever music you feel like making and you're still a composer, you know?
Right. I think being a composer means that you have a skill. You're not a role.
Yeah.
So, and I think oftentimes being stuck in a role, it makes it easy for people to define you in conversation. I think it's easy to categorize, but and this goes back to the whole capitalism and institution thing, but like, I think people are a lot more than just, what their role is. People are people first, and they have skills, and they can use those skills in a million different ways. And I think, that's, tying it back to what we've been talking about. That's why, I sing. I sing bossa nova and I sing jazz, but I also, like, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but I was for a little bit in an anime cover band.
Hmm.
We would cosplay and we would do things and perform locally, and it was a lot of fun. And I used my compositional skills for that too. I wrote for an indie video game that my friend made. Like, and it's just a skill. Yeah.
So I guess to bring everything full circle, you've made it clear that you didn't follow the traditional classical composition path, no grad school after your bachelor's. You mentioned the Asian American indie band. You sing bossa nova. You grew up on like the anime soundtracks you were just talking about in the video games, and also your parents' French yeye pop and canto pop. I mean, I don't know. I guess the sum of your parts is so different than like the sum of the parts of like an institutionalized composer, right?
Mhm.
And so I guess to just like tie it all up, I mean, how do you think that this DIY genre hopping path shaped the kind of composer that you are now?
I think it's actually the other way around. Like, I have my special interests, And what brings me joy and gives me energy is the thing that I want to make my life around. Right? So, like, yes, I am naturally very much a DIY person. I think, to get into the woo-woo aspect of it, like, yeah, I mean, I'm an Aquarius and whatever, but I think it's like, how do I be the meest me and celebrate that with what this world has to offer
Mm.
in any way possible? So I don't necessarily want to fit in a role, because I think that would suffocate any joy that might not, like, I'm not something that you can order on a menu at a restaurant. It's more about like going to a buffet and making your own weird meal. And I think that's more satisfying to me. So, yeah.
Love that metaphor as a fan of buffets.
I,
And as someone who feels similarly about my own work, and generally speaking finds that the music and the people I'm most attracted to shares that quality as well. So it's a beautiful sentiment.
yeah. I've actually referenced Tricot in one of my pieces. I think that's what you're talking about.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think it's important to show love and appreciation to things that like really inspire you in completely different, like, just soundscapes, or just like places, like it was supposed to be a classical thing, but I was like, you know what? This needs to breathe a little, so Trico walked in and was like, oh, this is perfect. So
Yeah, totally.
yeah.
So getting into my final set of questions, these are all questions that I ask everybody. Starting with, what do you think you would be doing artistically or otherwise if it wasn't composing, if it like no music at all?
Well, I actually really like working with clay, and I have an online shop, an online Etsy shop, and right now it's just selling like a couple of mugs, but I eventually want to work on clay products. I really like, so I know like the listeners won't be able to see this, but since we're doing video, this is one of the things that I've made.
Mm.
It's part of like a Christmas ornament, and I realized that I really like making Christmas ornaments, but so it's like a flower, and it's woman inspired. So it has, sort of like a spicy thing to it, but like it's basically like a bunch of flower ornaments that allude to something else.
Yeah.
And I just think that's just such a beautiful way to celebrate women. And so I would love to work with clay more. It's something that's very meditative for me and expressive. And I could fixate on it. My neurodivergent side is very happy when I'm working with clay.
Yeah. My wife, Susanna, who is also a composer, she also does pottery, and
Ooh.
she finds it to be a very grounding counterpart to the other art that she makes. So
Yes. It's very, like, you can touch it, Oh, yeah. Very grounding for sure.
and I'll add that she convinced me, I'll say. I almost said it. She roped me into it with her. She convinced me to join her, and I was doing it for a few years. And there is something a little bit more like, I'm the kind of composer, I will ruminate, I will dwell, I will take a lot of time on a piece if I'm allowed to. Whereas making a physical object of some kind out of clay, and it's like, wow, I just made like 2 bowls in an hour, or 3 bowls, whatever. It's like a very different, and I see where she's coming from, like this whole grounding ass. I mean, not to mention like the metaphor of the earth and stuff, right?
Sure. It's also the metaphor of like the process, right? Like if you can take like a compositional process, which is mostly mental, and apply it to making pottery, right? Like, and I'm sure you understand, but for our listeners, it's like you have this idea, or maybe you don't have an idea. You're just sort of playing around with the clay, and then all of a sudden an idea comes, and then you start to form it, and then okay, maybe you don't like it or you do like it, and then you put it into the oven. That's manifesting the piece, and then all of a sudden now you
Yeah,
have these parts for these musicians, and then they're gonna perform it. And so it's, I think, very similar. It sort of embodies the process in a certain way that I think is quite beautiful.
totally. What are you trying to get better at in your creative practice right now?
So I have the problem of like being very, very much involved with collaborations. I have a tendency to prioritize projects with other people. And I think right now what I'm trying to do is prioritize projects that only serve, well, not only serve me, but it's like it's accentuating and investing in my relationship with myself and my joy. Like I have a lot of people who are like, oh, you like anime, let's do something with anime music together. Or you really like this like Brazilian composer, let's do more of that stuff. Or let's try to find winery gigs, or let's, all this stuff. And I'm just like, you know I like doing all that. I'm really excited about doing all that. I get excited that people want to work with me. It's very meaningful to me, and it touches me. And at the end of the day, if I spend all of my time doing that, I end up missing out on the little Lillian, the inner child Lillian. That's, we had all these things that we wanted to do. We have a whole fantasy world of like a Disneyland of like stuff we wanted to do, and we have a message. Let's make that message happen. So I'm invested in doing that at the moment. I'm trying to do that right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally feel you. I have in the past lamented, like, I wish more people were coming to me for commissions and stuff like that. And now I've arrived at a point where it's like, there's a very specific thing I'm trying to make, and it's like an inner urge compelling me to do that. And I don't think that's actually part of the equation. So, of course, now people are coming to me for commissions. And fortunately, it's like people who I love and who are on board with whatever my vision might be and projects that fit. But I totally know what you're talking about. Like this, it's not that like collaborating on a new piece with somebody is like I don't feel like doing that, or that doesn't serve my work. It's more like um like I don't know, there's like very specific kinds of ideas that I haven't had a chance to pursue yet, and my earlier work is not a frame of reference and all this kind of stuff. So yeah.
Right. There's still some self excavation that you want to do. And it's so funny that now, like, you're getting all these opportunities to collaborate with other people. It's like a catch 22,
Mm,
right? You only
yeah,
have so much time.
absolutely.
Yeah, I relate.
Is there a tool that you use in your creative practice that you think everyone should know about and that everyone else could benefit from? This could be like an actual tool, like an object. It could be software. It could be a process, um, a method, or whatever.
I think the thing that is loudest to me, let's see, that I use as a tool that I think is applicable to anyone and everyone, is to just don't forget what the music is about. I think that's the most important thing. I mean, I could say something about software, and I could say or hardware or whatever, but like I think for me the most important thing is the spiritual aspect of it. It's like, don't forget what the music is about, and don't forget why you're doing it, because it's very easy to do that with music, even though it's an art. And yeah, we can get into like the idealism of art making, but once you get into it, there's a lot of ego, and I think it's important to remember what the art is about.
Absolutely. So, my final question, and before I ask this, I will acknowledge that you've been quite forthcoming in this conversation. And so perhaps you have said everything that you have wanted to say, but I'll ask you nonetheless. And that is, what is something that you've never had a chance to say about your art that you've always wanted to share with people?
I feel emotional about this I think I just really want people to remember that making art is the ultimate form of expressing love to me. And remembering love and not getting into like, the cringiness of this statement, which I realize it can come off as that, but with seeing where we are in the world and in world history, there seems to be such a lack of it that I feel the need to say it. I'm all for art that encourages curiosity. I'm all for art that, it makes you think, and, in a very mental way. But I also, everything that I do is touched by love, a yearning for love, a containment of love, a celebration of love. And, it's just like a reminder that you never really know what any person is going through, and to remember their humanity. I think that's the crux of what art is to remember humanity and how important that is. And we need more of it. We need to remember that we are more than the roles that have been, inflicted onto us. And it's all about love. That sounds very hippy-dippy of me, but I am in the Bay Area, so why not?
Well, a beautiful way to cap off this conversation. Lillian, as far as I'm concerned, this was, for me, an afternoon well spent, and I feel like we could keep talking, but we'll put a pin in it for now. And I just want to thank you so much for not just your time today, but for sharing everything that you've shared, and also letting us know more about this kind of world of therapeutic music that I don't think a lot of composers realize even exists. So thank you for everything.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. You're such a great curator of questions, and such a magician and warlock of like, you're creating such a space for people to connect with not just you, but with so many people. So thank you.
I appreciate it. I really don't think I've ever had a conversation quite like this one on the podcast, and for that matter, just in general in my life. Lillian is someone who has built her entire life around this idea that music is fundamentally an act of care for herself, for the people she plays for the world that she wants to live in. I found that genuinely moving and genuinely clarifying. So many thanks to Lillian for joining me today. You can find out more about Lillian Yee and her work on her website, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes. I'm Tyler Kline, and thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Music Maker. Music Maker with Tyler Kline is a production of Loose Leaf Transmissions, made for all ears. We are online at looseleaftransmissions.com, where you can find more episodes of the podcast, our radio show, Living Classical, as well as ways to support the show and the network in general. Thanks again for listening. Take care of yourself, and I'll catch you here next time. If this has been your first time listening to Music Maker, well, good news, there are over 40 episodes in the archive. I've also got a companion show called Micromaker with short excerpts from these interviews, with new episodes releasing multiple times each week. And if you want to make sure that you don't miss anything, follow both shows on whatever app that you're using. Thanks again for listening.